Alright, so right now I'm going to do a walkthrough on texturing from Trimsheets. This is a method for texturing larger pieces with lots of tiling textures and specifically environments. So this is a bit different from texturing props, because with a prop you're generally texturing based on the model. You're making a high poly, you're making a low poly, you're doing your bakes, you have all your AO and normal maps, and you have the model before you have the texture. In the case of the environment, you have the unwrap after the texture has been made, because you're going to make the texture first and then you're going to unwrap. And what that lets you do is it lets you use tiling materials and materials that tile infinitely to the left and to the right, and it lets you use one texture sheet for the entire large object. So the first thing to decide when you're making a trim sheet is how many materials you're going to need. So with this model, I have, let's say this shelf is going to be wooden. This window frame will be the same wood. This light stick, it'll be a bit of metal. It'll have a glowing top. We'll have one coat of paint up here. We'll have some, maybe this will be a different kind of wood. We'll have the floor, and we'll have this rug. So let's take this into Photoshop so we can start setting this up properly. So this is a really important part. This is where you make your texture mask, and this is a lot like the material ID mask that we made for our props from Marmoset. But what we're going to do is we're going to make this mask based on how many materials we're going to have. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say the two most important textures are the floor and the wall, because that is what takes up most of the screen space. So I'm going to dedicate most of the room on the texture to the floor and the wall. And note that in this case, this is not a square texture that you're probably used to. This is rectangular, and that's because when we're tiling infinitely to the left and to the right, the texture can be as thin as we want it, and having it longer just gives us more. Having it longer gives us more space to add texture, but we don't actually need it to keep tiling another full half. So we can save some space on the texture's final file size. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide this into sections. The way I like to generally do this is to start with start by dividing it in half, so I can keep things in nice even portions. So I'll divide that in half. That's just by making a new layer and filling it so that Photoshop can start using its snaps. So I'll do that. Duplicate that guy, and this time it'll be blue. And when you're setting this up, you want to use colors that are as far apart as possible, because otherwise your color pick can get confused and it won't know. It'll just make it easier for masking later on down the line. So I'm going to say a good full half of this texture is dedicated now to just the walls and just the floor. What the rest of the space is for can be for the smaller stuff. So the secondary wood. This won't be a full quarter. Maybe this will be half a quarter. In that case, I'll duplicate this again. Duplicate that. Move it by half. Make it a different color. And let's move it down. So now we have something for the secondary wood. Say walls, floor wood, secondary wood. And then we'll do this another secondary wood size one for the wood that'll make up the shelf and maybe the inside of this window frame. We'll duplicate that. We don't need to resize it this time, so I just move it down and recolor it. Might be a little too close to the red, so we'll make that a bit darker. Yeah, that's better. What else do we need? So we need something for the rug. So we'll make rug's pretty important, so it takes up a lot of space. So I'll make the rug another full-size quarter, or for full-size 8. Move that down. Make a new color. That. And the rest of the space I'm going to dedicate to the little stuff. So the metal that'll go in the frame here. The metal of the light stick and the emissive that'll go on the light. So with these guys, it's a bit different because these guys aren't going to be tiling to the left and to the right. These guys are just, I need a space where I know I'm going to put all my, all of that same texture. Alright, so I'm going to divide this little space by a little differently. So I'll start with the base of 1 of the eighths. And I'm going to divide that in quarters widthwise. Start by going to the quarters. Change the color of that one. Do it again. One more time. Move that over. Make that another color. And then we'll make the background black. Let's make sure this one's distinctive enough. Alright, that should do it. So what we have here is we have the walls, we have the floor, we have secondary structural wood, we have the accent wood, we have the rug, and we have the first metal, the second metal, the emissive for the light, and anything else could go here. For now, I'll say nothing's there. So I'm going to save this as my color mask. I have a PNG of that, so I can take that into Substance Designer, where I'm going to make a new substance. I'll set the height to 2048 and the width to 1024. I'll name it environment. And instead of a bunch of bakes, I'm going to start with just this guy. And what we have here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 textures. So we're going to set up a multi-material blend. We're going to change the channels to just, again, same as last time, just base color, normal, glossiness, or not glossiness, roughness, and metallic. And we're going to set it to 8 materials. What I'm going to demo now is how to make the materials to fill this out. So what I need is I need plaster for the walls, I need wood grain that I'm going to use a couple times, and I'm going to need metal. And what else? Threads for the rugs, wood grain for the wood, probably wood panels for the floor, because I know that's going to be a bunch of 2x4s and it's not going to be one big sheet of wood, and then a couple kinds of metal. So over here, I'm going to make a new graph, and I'm going to call this wood grain. And this one again will be 1024 by 2048. Okay. So for this is going to follow the same procedure that I showed you for building materials for your crates and such. So what I'm going to start off with is a black and white mask. I'm going to make some noise. So with wood grain flows in one direction, but it tends to wobble a little bit as the tree grows outwards. It bends and it bulges a little bit. So if you think about when you cross section a tree and you see the rings, the wood grain is the opposite of that cross section. So it's running up the length of the tree, so you're getting those rings in profile rather than from the top down. So what you want to think about is how to recreate that. So I'm going to start with some stripes, because that's about as simple as it can get. And what I want is anisotropic noise. There's that. Noise. So what this gives me is these long strips that are just that are gradiated from white to black, And all this does is it gives me a nice base of some visual interest that kind of resembles the noise that would be in a 2x4, in a 2x4 of wood. But this isn't good enough because this is just striations, and this isn't how wood behaves. So we're going to look through our noises. We're going to find something else that'll maybe make it a bit more interesting. So you've got stuff like this noise that starts to add a little bit of threading, and that could be cool. By itself, it doesn't quite look like wood, but it's got kind of the feel that I want to go for. So I'm going to keep that, and I'm going to transform it because an anisotropic noise is running sideways, and this is running vertically. So I'm going to use a transformation node, rotate it 90 degrees clockwise, and it starts to get a little weird, and that's because it's on this 1:2 aspect ratio. So now, where it was long this way, it's now stretched vertically, and it doesn't look quite as good. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the stretch of the height. So it's wrong direction. So that doubled the length, so it's even more stretched now. So I'm going to take that to 50% to get it back to where it was before, 50 more percent to get it to basically just a rotated version of itself, and then one more for good measure, just to start getting those wood striations that I want. I'm going to blend these two together. I'm going to keep the anisotropic noise on the bottom, and I'll put this new grainy stuff on top, and I'll use maybe an overlay. And you start to see like, oh, that looks a little like wood grain, but not quite, because the anisotropic noise is still too uniform in a way that wood would never be. So it just doesn't look like wood yet. So we're going to start playing with some other warping nodes, and what these do is they start to warp your texture based on another texture. I'm going to use a warp. For this, I like vector warp. Or no, sorry, I like just directional warp. So we're gonna plug this in as the input, and you can plug any black and white into the warp intensity, and you'll start to see results. So just to show you what that looks like, I'm gonna plug in this grunge map, which is a pretty drastic black and white into there, and we'll start to see a little bit of noise. Turn up the intensity and the direction, and you see that where that thing is black and white is moving the texture. This one's really grainy, so we're not getting the results I want. So I just want to warp the lines a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use spheres, because a sphere gradiates from white to black. White being, yes, warp this, black being, don't warp this. We'll plug in just a sphere, and what we'll start to see is that the texture starts to bend, and that's a bit more of what I want. So the next step is to make these spheres a bit more random. So we're going to use something such as the splatter node, and that'll take whatever input I give it and, well, right now line it up. But as you play with these settings, you can start to learn things like disorder and randomize the disorder. So it starts to scatter these around. Change up the size variation so that some of them are bigger than others. The grid number, so there's fewer, and we have fewer and bigger. And let's see, change the size, height, so everything's overlapping. And what we have now is something a bit more interesting. So we start to see striations all over the place, and that starts to look a little more like wood grain. Now if we plug this in to the blend mask, we have something that looks a little more wood-like, but again, not quite there. So I'm going to blur this so it's not like pure white, pure black with hard angles. A strong blur. We're getting a lot smoother lines. Maybe this is a point where I say this directional warp isn't really doing it for me, so I'm gonna try something else. I'm gonna try a different warp. Let's see what normal warp does. Input, gradient input, intensity. This is one of the ones that looks like it only goes up to 1, but with Substance Designer, a lot of these you can type in your own input. So I'll just crank it up to 100. Look at that. That is more what I'm looking for. That's got the rings in it that wood tends to have when stuff overlaps itself. We're just going to turn that up a little bit, and boom, we start to have something a bit more interesting. And then with the splatter, you can change the seed. So yeah, trying to find one that's really interesting. And maybe we use this as a base, and we blend these two together so that we have some more noise in it. What we're starting to see is a lot of interesting variation that gets into the wood, and it's starting to look more like wood. And we can copy this warp over so we can use it again. And plug this one into it. We'll combine those. And let me turn this one down. Yeah, we're getting something a little like wood. And from there we can just add noise just to break it up a little bit. So there's more noises. This is generally better, especially if you're doing photoreal, which I'm working towards right now. Let's see, like dirt is nice because that's just speckles. Invert that one so I can keep the black dots. Use those to break this up. The blend node. Put this as the background. This on top, and multiply. And we're starting to get something. So with more time, I could do more realistic wood, but I feel like this is a good start. So we'll plug this in just to see what it looks like on our normal map, and we'll start to see that kind of looks like wood. So again, what we've made here is a mask, so we can use this to combine two color textures. So we'll plug that in as our opacity. And plug in this as the background. We'll make another color node. Plug that in as the foreground. And on the background, where it's black, where the black would show through, we'll make this a darker brown, because we'll call that the recessed spaces in the wood. A desaturated, deep brown. And for the other one, we'll use a more saturated, lighter brown. Reverse that. So desaturate the. Saturate that right now. Now we're starting to see some wood. Some other stuff to think about is we're keeping all the roughness and metalness. Metalness can stay as is because we know that wood is not metal. For the roughness, another blend node. Plug in that as the opacity. And we'll say that the deeper recessed areas are maybe more shiny because they haven't been scuffed like the outer facing ones have. So we'll use a grayscale node. Plug that in the bottom. And say that that part's pretty shiny. So about 25% rough. And on the top, make that a bit more rough. So what we have, it's a nice variation. Cool stuff. And then with roughness, we can do more visual things. So we can use back to that grunge map. We can blend that over the top and give it some more interesting variation. And just turn that down so we're keeping some of it. Make this less so you can see the. Yeah, so we're starting to get something wood-like, and we'll be able to use this again and again for whatever our wood needs are. So we can recolor this, we can add paint on top of it, but this is a good base wood grain. So we'll save that, and we'll keep that as wood grain. So then when we go back to environment, we just drag in wood grain, and now we have a full material to work with. The cool thing there is that, so much like when you're picking off your material ID map, you can pick off this this map. So now I want to say that this was plaster, this was the wood panels on the floor, and this deep green or mid green was we'll say that was the wood unit. So that was material 3. So now I can plug in material 3, plug in the unmodified wood. It's material 3. And get rid of those two, get rid of these guys, plug that in. So now, along that strip, I have tiling wood to work with. It's looking a bit big, so what I might do is use a material transform, which transforms everything at once. Change the input channels to match my material. Now we have wood that's more to scale with what I'm looking for. And you can see it tiles seamlessly because it was made with substance design noises, which are guaranteed essentially to the tile in horizontal and vertical directions. So yeah, so now we start to see that we have wood grain to work with. So next I'm going to make plaster, so that's a big one. So back to here, new plaster. This one will be a bit simpler. This is basically what I made last week with the for the noise on my crate. So I'm going to use the same kind of thing with divots. Where the divots are the chunks taken out of the plaster. Invert that, plug it in the normal route, and already it starts to look kind of plastery. With plaster, it's generally pretty rough, and you're not going to see a lot of roughness variation unless somebody's like splashed varnish or splashed water on the wall. And I'm going to say that's not something I want to deal with right now, so we're just going to leave it at just a little bit of normal information. Maybe we take another one and we blend them together. So like we have these nice divots, and we have on the other side, we'll change the seed up a little bit so the divots are in a different place, and we'll blend that on top as extrusions, so bumpy spots where the plaster was imperfect. So that means I can't use white, so what I'm going to do instead is use a medium gray. And I will overlay that so that it darkens. Oops. Multiply. Yeah, multiply. So that the dark spots cut into the medium gray. And then I will blend again. This time screen, so the white parts are what stays. So now we have a little differentiation between, like, some spots stick out, some parts go in. And that's exactly what I'm looking for. And then with the color, I'm just going to pick an off-white eggshell, something nice and homey. With plaster, you're not going to get a lot of the same color variation and divots because it's when you're damaging plaster, you're just pushing the plaster into itself, and you're not cutting out to anything underneath. And it's a bit less finicky with color. So I'm gonna, yeah, that's fine. I like show white with some normal variation. Maybe turn up the normal map a little bit, just so you can see what's going on there. And I'll go back to the thing, and we can drag in our plaster. The plaster, I'm going to plug it in to the base color, and that'll automatically fill in everything on here that hasn't been claimed yet. So I'm going to claim the blue last. So until then, everything else will be taken up with this plaster. And again, notice it tiles horizontal. That's really important. Let's see. So now I'm going to show you how to handle the wood grain, or the wood planks, by using the wood grain we already made. So what we're going to do is make another substance graph. We'll call it wood planks. The wood planks are interesting. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the wood grain that I already made, and we're going to overlay a plank normal on top of it. And we're going to I'm going to show you how to mess with the placement of stuff with using masks. So what we're going to do is note that when you make a material, you can change the seed. And what the seed does is it determines how everything is randomized within that current window of the graph. So your noises will be different depending on what seed they are. The name of the noise just decides what kind of math the noise is going to use. So randomizing just gives it a different set of base parameters to work with. So I can actually have like an infinite number of different kinds of wood based on this one that I've already made, because I've already told it how to construct it, and this just changes the base numbers that it uses. So I'm going to use this this base normal, and I'm going to blend it on top of itself, but a different version of itself on top of itself. I'm going to make a material blend. Change the channels again. I'm going to use 2 different versions of the material. And what we have here is I'm going to change the seed on this one so that this instance of the wood is different from this instance of the wood. Now with the grayscale mask, I'm going to make bricks. I'm going to use a brick generator. It's a nice way to get, it's a really convenient way to get planks and such. I have a lot of parameters to control. I can customize that, do some fun stuff there. But for the most part, I'm going to leave it as is. I'm going to set that aside for later, but I'm going to keep this as my plank ratio. Then I'm going to make a checkerboard. And I'm going to transform it so that it matches this. See how many there are. Bricks high. 15. That's easier. 12. So this needs to be a third of what it is now. That's a bit hard to do. So don't do thirds. Let's say 16. That makes it 25% of the height it is now. And 50%. So what this did is this gave me a mask. So I'll overlay it on itself on this to show you what it's doing right now. So what this did is it's masking every other plank. Note that it doesn't work for the middle plank because those are on a different offset, so we're going to have to do something different for that one. With that, we're going to duplicate this transform, and we're going to move this slightly to, well, actually, exactly 25% to the right. So instead, now it will affect those middle ones. But we still need to decide. We need to combine these 2 masks. We're going to make a third one. Instead of moving it this time, we're going to widen it. So now we have a mask that works on every other one. We use that as our opacity. And put that on the bottom, that on the top. Yeah. Ooh, that didn't come out right. What did I do wrong? I'll pause the recording for a second while I figure that out. No, I can't do that. All right, hang on. Just bear with me. Oh, right. Okay, my bad. So I should have taken it off multiply. I just copy. Oh, okay. Actually, that does work out fine. All right, cool. Oh well. All right. So what I'm doing here is I'm masking half of the bricks to be one kind of wood and half of them to be the other. Plug that in here, and what we start to see is it knows how to break up the wood. So now plug that in over here. Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't figure out how to pause it. Combine, turn this into a normal amp. Combine the normals. And turn those normals up. What we see is we start to have planks of different kinds of wood. So when the wood crosses the plank, it changes wood kind, which is what this mask nonsense is all about. I'll try to figure out a time code or something so you guys can skip that part. In any case, so you can tweak the bevels, get a bit tighter. And another thing about wood is when it's on the floor, it's generally polished. So we're going to reduce we're probably going to take the normal map out almost entirely from the bottom. Because with polished wood, you're not getting a lot of grain. You'll keep the roughness variation because that's just something that's natural to the wood. But you won't see the wood grain as much as something that's like unpolished wood. So then we can do some color stuff. So we can exaggerate these edges. So much like your props, you can use a curvature map. With this normal map, you can use Substance's curvature generator. And we'll turn this in, use a gradient map to turn that into a color map. And now we have something that can highlight the edges and darken the recesses. Switch that to overlay. Now we start to see some nice wood planks. So I'll use this as my wood grain. Maybe darken it a little bit. Make it a bit more oaky. Deep red. And overlay. Multiply. Yeah. So something like that. It's just a little more rich. You can do some fun stuff in the generator too with changing the slope. So that'll just add some noise so that the planks aren't perfectly uniform. You can change the height variation. Some of them are more recessed than others. And that reflects in the normal lamp. And again, you can also turn this into a gradient map. Blend that over everything. That's color variation. Yeah, so now we start to have some nice varied wood that again tiles perfectly. We'll go back to our main trim sheet and we'll plug that in as the second option. This time we want the red, so we're going to go to material 2, pick the red, big red, and immediately this will disappear and the normals are bright because nothing's plugged in. I'll plug this in. Now we have a sheet of wood. Alright, so what else do I need? I need another kind of secondary wood and the carpet. So I'll do the secondary wood real quick. Same thing for this. Maybe I'll make it a little smaller or green. And I'll say that it's painted the same color as the plaster. So I'll make it, so first I'll designate that fourth one as purple. So the wood shows up there. Looks the same as the other one because I haven't changed it yet. So we're going to material transform. And half the size again, so it's much more refined. Maybe for this one we'll make it bigger, so we can use that. And then these are all still editable, so I'll go in and I'll make another blend node. Drop in the same color as the plaster in there. And reduce the opacity a little bit so it looks like it's been painted. If it's been painted, I'm not going to see the normals as much. So I'll go into the normal, make a fresh normal, and I'll blend that normal over that normal, and I'll just reduce the opacity a little bit so the normal strength is a bit lower. So yeah, there's your painted wood that'll accent the plaster. So now carpet. I'm not going to go very far into because carpet's complicated, especially if you want to get into like how to make something look fuzzy. So I'll just do something simple for that one. And with that, just grab some threads. There's a lot of nice fibers in here, and you can play with warp a lot. So I'm going to bring in some nice various fiber mesh things. And something a bit random, so cells. Cells are nice. That starts to look like bunched up carpet nodules. I'll make a base of fiber. I'm going to make that tile a lot. Something for the mesh, make the tile a lot. That blend those on top of each other. So we have something that's less recognizable as flat substance noise. Start to have something like that. That's a bit carpety. We'll blend this guy on top. And we'll do a little warp. Using the same kind of method as we did for the wood, but a little less intense because this carpet doesn't need to be that crazy. And note that it's doing hard edges because this goes to perfect black lines. So I'm just going to drop a blur on top of that one, so the warp is a little less intense. Plug this into the normal app, see how it looks, and that's fine. I recommend a bit more variation, but for the sake of this demonstration, this is okay. Now make a quick roughness map. Carpet is generally very rough, so there's not a lot of variation. So make that pretty rough. And then do a little color. Get red. And then we'll blend in this way. There's like a fake AO. I don't really like that. Got too black. Black is generally not something that shows up in, like, full black is not something that shows up in color a lot. Like full white and full black are generally not true to real life. Like most true blacks, like the truest black is that weird paint that guy came out with. Most things are like medium gray or very dark gray. Like if you look at how the like your computer monitors are influenced by the light, they're still picking up a lot of ambient light, so they're like still slightly gray. And everything has a little bit of roughness on it, so that that refracts light in such a way that everything has a little bit of color. So I'll just use instead of using black as my base, I'm going to use the dark red as my base, and then use the warp as a mask to add a different color on top. So now it's deep red in the crevices and lighter red on the outside, and that's good enough for now. So back to the trim sheet, drag in my carpet, back to the mask, and I'm going to designate material 5 as this yellow. So I have carpet. I'll make another material blend so I can make that carpet a little smaller. Yeah, that's fine. It's threaded carpet. So the last three are really simple. So that's I'll make that gold metal, silver metal, and yellow white for the light. And this one I don't need to make a full material for because it's going to be so small. So I'm just going to do that straight on the material line. So I know it's going to be metal, so I'm going to switch that one to grayscale, make it white, and just plug that in as a metallic. Same thing for this one. Roughness, I'll make it slightly rough, mid-rough, because that'll catch some nice light, but it won't be too reflective. Generally for metals, I like 50% gray. It's a nice in between for not too shiny. When you get really shiny, it starts to hit uncanny valley territory because game engines generally aren't good at rendering reflections. So if you can just add a very small amount of roughness, even like 90 or like 0.1 to like 0.8% roughness, you'll blur the reflections enough that the audience will recognize that it's metal and it's shiny without the game engine having to stretch to show that, oh wait, these reflections aren't realistic. So so 80 to 50 is a good place for shiny metal. Normal, no normal information in the metal. For this one, it's just going to make it really simple. I'm going to designate material 6 is pink, and material 7 is this green. So we start to see it'll default to a white color, so we see that this is already like a shiny white metal. So for the first one, I'm going to make that the gold, plug that in. Yeah, it's going to go to black. Metalness absorbs light, and black also absorbs light, so metal black is like the truest black you can get in the game engine. And worth noting is almost no metals are actually black. Most metals have, like I mentioned it last week, I think, but most metals are like in the lighter spectrum of color, so gold is actually like a medium yellow, even though it looks dark because it's picking up so much ambient light. So I'll use those two as my metals. And then make another quick one. For silver, I like to add a little bit of color, a little bit of blue. Let's make it a little more interesting. Yeah, that's nice. Okay. And then for the last one, it's just the emissive. So I'll go over emissives now. But I'll use the same setup as the metals, except it won't be metallic. For roughness, all the way rough because it is going to emit light rather than take it in, so I don't want it bouncing any shininess. Gonna designate that one. Do a flat normal, so that's not broken. And give it a base color of yellowish. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so there's my trim sheet. Oh yeah, so one more thing is just the emissive. So I'm going to do is make a color mask, color to mask, and pick out connect those two. Pick the emissive patch. So now I have a mask of just that space, and like another output node. And this will let Substance Designer save out a fourth image instead of just the ones I've chosen so far. Name it emissive. Label it material. Oops, label it emissive. Group it material. Add a usage, so you know where to put it. Change that to emissive. Now blend. Use this as my blend. Flat black in the background because nothing else is giving off light. It's just this. I'm going to use this color, and this will be my emissive map. And if I refresh this and tell it to view outputs, now this lights up because it knows it's an emissive and it knows it's supposed to give off light. So here I go. I have a full trim sheet ready to go. Now, so what's the next step? This is where it goes a lot faster. Most of the trim sheet work happens in the texture side of it, and then the UVs are much simpler. So I'm going to export these. Export the outputs. Okay, so this is specific to 3ds Max, but I'm sure you guys can figure out how to translate this to unwrapping in Maya. I'm going to make a material, and I'm going to give it the base color of my texture. And I'm going to drag it on here. Right off the bat, it doesn't look good because this is not unwrapped yet. But like I said, we are unwrapping to the texture rather than texturing to the unwrap. I'm going to start with the room. And I'm going to start unwrapping. So I believe there's a button in Maya that'll let you view the texture as part of the underneath the unwrap. So that's the big thing. So I'm going to start with the walls. Like those guys. And when I flat map them, you start to see what we're going to end up doing. Is like now it starts to have this entire texture. But if I scale it down and drag it onto the plaster side, now the wall shares that plaster texture. Now the wall has just that plaster texture, and there's plenty of room for everything else to have the rest of the textures. I'm going to do the same thing with the other side of the wall. Flat map it. Stitch those. Clean that up. Now the wall has plaster, and the rest of it can have anything else. So I'm going to say this was the secondary wood. Unwrap that guy. Move that. Straighten my UVs out so that they're all going in one direction. Again, this is Mac specific, but you guys have your own procedures for doing these things in Maya. Now that plank gets that wood. That's what we're looking for. We're going to do the floor next. Do the floor, the wood plank texture. Look who's there. And now the plank has that wood floor. So the problem here though is that these planks seem really big now. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into the model, and we're going to give ourselves some more space to work with. What I mean by that is we're going to add cuts in the wood so that we can turn it into multiple sets. I'm going to detach this so I can cut parts of it. And I'm going to add cuts lengthwise. I'll just do one for now. So now instead of working with one big piece, I'm working with two halves. I'm going to go back to unwrapping it, and this time, instead of unwrapping it as one full piece, I'm going to split these guys. Stack them on top of each other using snaps, angle snaps. And I'm going to like that. I'm going to take up that entire space and make sure that it is right at the border of the edge of the texture. Doesn't bleed into any of the other ones. Now we have higher res wood that's still tiles. And what we can do here is we can also have some fun with offsetting stuff so that these aren't two of the same texture. We can just grab this one and move it to the right. So what that does is the interesting thing about Trimsheets is that the geometry in the unwrap doesn't have to stay within the bounds of the texture because everything tiles infinitely to the left and to the right. So we can just move this wherever we want, and if we have a more interesting tiling because of it, then that's all the better. I'm gonna move it right there. So for the rug, just a quick planar map. That guy down. Should come into the rug part. Rug's a bit high res, but that's okay. We would do the same thing that we did for the wood, so we would cut the rug up into multiple stripes and use different parts of the thread for multiple slots, or we could go back into the texture and reduce the size of the threads, which we could actually do right now. Just reduce that again, export again. Now the rug's a bit more high res. It's a bit nicer. So now we're just going to do the last couple steps. This frame, and then we'll get over to these guys. So what I said was like this inside part's going to be metal. I'm going to detach that so I can work with it separately. And then this guy's going to be wood. So interesting thing to think about when you're doing trim sheets is where material breaks happen. So with this guy, I would not just flat map him and drop him onto the wood. And the reason for that is that doesn't make sense from a construction point of view. So if I do this, it looks like this was one plank of wood that somebody took a buzzsaw or jigsaw to the inside of somehow. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to treat each side as its own 2x4 plank of wood. I'm going to break that guy off and unwrap him separately. Turn him sideways. Loosen. Put him in there. And already, it starts to look more like more than one piece of wood. And that's what I'm going for. Okay. I want to keep everything about the same scale so we're not working in a bunch of different resolutions. And another thing this does, it makes it really easy to decide to like change what kind of material you want something to be. Because like I do this and I look at it and it doesn't make sense that this room would be all nice and then the windowsill would be raw plywood. So I can just move it down into the white painted wood, and suddenly it matches the trim. It looks better. With this guy, I'll do the inside. So he's going to be metal, he said, so I'm going to do the same thing. Get all my different strips on there, stack them on top of each other. But this one, with metal, it's a bit interesting because most of the time your color information is not going to be in the texture itself. Metal's color information generally comes from a flat color that is influenced by the global reflections. So you don't need to worry as much about stacking metal on top of itself, because the repeating or the color information isn't coming from the texture; it's coming from the global reflection. So I'm going to grab all these, shrink them down, stack them on top of each other, put them in the silver metal that I want, and boom. All right, and last bit of this room, I did the same thing for the outside of the windowsill. And I say that this one is also the white painted wood. And just for convenience's sake, I could scale it inside the texture, but I don't like everything overlapping because it's hard to access afterwards, and I can just move it off to the side and it'll still have the texture because technically all of this continues infinitely. So there, texture of the room. Now we're just going to do these couple props. and I'll show you some cool tricks for adjusting shading within a trim sheeted environment. Same thing. I'm gonna have this guy. This guy's more of a true prop, so we're not going to be doing as much stacking. Some quick seams. In your case, you would probably want to use, if you had a shelf like this, you'd probably want this to be its own separate prop, but this is just to demonstrate that anything can be trim sheeted if you put your mind to it. So this will be the raw plywood. Same thing for these supports down here. Or maybe those will be metal. That'll be more fun. Add some seams. Cookie suit. Yep. And then last one, we'll just do this lamp. So that's a really high quality lamp right there. So the lamp is going to go into the emissive texture. And the base is going to go into the gold texture. And there we go. Now we have a fully textured room that all shares the same texture map. You can do this for basically anything as long as you have enough texture slots on the material. Just like set aside some space and figure out how big your tiling is and line it up properly. And you can do it all live within your modeling program just to have some stuff going for you. So this next part, I'm going to show you, it's called face weighted normals, and it's a replacement for a normal map. So with a trim sheet, as you can guess, because everything was overlapped, everything's like not even on the texture space, you can't bake normals, and you can't have those really nice rounded edges that lighting will pick up nicely, but you have some other options. So with environment modeling, smoothing groups and making sure your edges are, in Maya, the equivalent of that is making sure that your edges are soft or hard, depending on their angle, is very important. Because without normal maps to tell your edges whether to be soft or hard, the game engine's only going to be able to show the player what you've told it about which edges are soft, which edges are hard. And that comes down to, like, when you're getting down to it, like, that's a really hard edge, and that does not look like anything that's real life, because we don't have anything that can cut that sharp. So what we're going to do is we're going to approximate that with chamfers and bevels. So I'm going to demonstrate on this piece of wood what I mean. So I'm just going to drop a chamfer on there. This is the same thing as beveling in Maya. And I'm just going to give it some breathing room. So what that does is it starts to round the edges. I'll do some research into a good replacement for a face weighted smoothing plugin for Maya, but it might do it automatically. So by default, if all my edges smooth, it looks really soft. But if I run face weighted smoothing, actually I'll show you one quick thing first. So this is a normals visualizer, and this tells this is a representation of how the modeling program looks at the edge. So with normals, this is how the light is striking the object. So this is what it looks like when you have a chamfer on and everything is smooth. It's saying that one beam of light is hitting this edge and is averaged out across this corner. If I do not have my smoothing group set up, if my edges are hard, we'll clear those guys. So it's these hard transitions. This is what the normals look like. So these are split normals, and this is when it's not average. It's saying light is directly striking this face, it's directly striking this face, and it's not going to roll over. So what we have here, when I say face-weighted normals, is it's going to prioritize how it averages. And it's going to give more importance to larger faces, so that less importance is given to these little corners. And it's hard to explain directly because I don't know the math behind it. But visually, what it does is it tightens up the normals. So instead of coming off directly at an averaged angle, it gives more weight to this top face and less weight to these thin middle faces. So what we have now is a very creased board that starts to look a bit more like it was machined. Now my chamfers are a bit big for it to be truly accurate, but this is what I'm looking for. Do the same thing here. I have my smoothing group set up, so I believe there's an operation for this equivalent in Maya where you can only you can select and only bevel hard edges, but that's what I'm going to do the equivalent of here. Just really quick make sure that I have all my edges smoothed. So select all those, make sure that's in group. Select these guys. Harden that edge, harden this edge. And again, I'm going to bevel the chamfer in this modeling program. And right now it bevels everything, and I don't want it to add stepping to these guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it to only smooth or only bevel unsmoothed edges. I'm going to tighten those up. And already it starts to look a bit more like our high polys that we worked on. And I set everything to the same smoothing group, all my edges to soft. And do the same thing, run on the face weighted normals. And it's going to clamp those up, so all my edges have a nice little highlight. And it doesn't, but it also doesn't look like a soft blob. Ooh, and there goes Max. All right, hang on. It probably recovered. We're live, baby. Yeah. I got auto back though, so you know what? Should be okay. Alright. Let's see how far back I am. 636. Yeah. Okay, that's not so bad. Alright, that's fine. In any case, so this is how you would add like normal information to something as big as an environment, where you can't have a high poly because you can't bake. Instead, you're going to chamfer based on chamfer or bevel based on smoothing groups. So with these unsmoothed edges, I'm adding just a little bevel in between them. All these. Probably wouldn't have one between the floor and the wall because the wall in real life doesn't blend into the floor, but the stuff that's been painted, like the paint will hide in the crevices and soften out the points where stuff blends together. I'm just going to collapse that. So that's a wrong kind of chamfer. Standard chamfer. Okay, that's better. This time I'm going to save. It's important. Okay, yeah, and I set all my edges to soft, which looks a little garbage right now, but when I go back, oh, that's bad. I don't want indents. I'll put that guy together. Just all my edges. Okay. Cool. Alright, so yeah, all my smoothing groups are set to the same thing, so it starts if it looks a little garbage. But once I run, I save again, in case it crashes. There we go. You have nice, as though they were normal mapped edges along an environment that's trim sheeted. So I'm going to export this. We're going to take a look at how this looks outside of 3D Space. So it'll keep the max materials, but I need to add the other parts. So I'm going to apply the default material. Turn it on beta. And my roughness. And my north. And dark. And this. There we go. Normals need to be inverted because I set up the normals as DirectX in Substance Designer, so they're going to look a little weird. And so now I can start to see like what needs tweaking. It's like the plaster is obviously a bit too exaggerated. Well, my normals are a bit blown out. But here's where we can start having some fun with lighting. I'm going to light. Let's make that a point light. Omni light. This will be the light that comes off this bulb. Yeah, it's cut. And I'm going to tell the cylinder not to cast shadows because the light's coming off of it. I'm going to say the light's coming through the window. Let's screw this a little bit. I'm going to add a blocker, a light blocker, so that the light doesn't come through the window. This is just for presentation. This isn't something you generally do for artwork. So now that catches some of the light only comes through the window. Ooh, yeah. And yeah, so that's about it. So what I would do next is I go back and tweak my texture based on what I know from what I've learned here. So I'm gonna change the material transform to something a bit less egregious for the plaster, so it's a bit smaller. Re-export it, and that'll update. Yeah, that starts to look a bit nicer. Just for some fun render tweaks, just to like right off the bat start your environment off looking right. Stuff like set that to a color so that you're only looking at the color information that you want. Always pick a good sky for what you're doing. That's just a lot of trial and error, like finding what best represents the colors you want. This is an indoor scene, so I'll probably do something like with a warm indoor light, not a lot of like direct sunlight. Back to render, some fun stuff to turn on. This will tank your performance, so might not want to do it on your laptops without saving. Global illumination is really cool. Ambient occlusion is important because this is what we're baking on our props. But in renders and in game engines, you can often like add ambient occlusion as an after effect. So that's what this is. So you can have some fun with that. Add some contact shadow, so it starts to look a bit more real. Global illumination is how light bounces within the room or within the space. So it's casting light from all directions, taking all light sources and saying, here's how they're giving off light. Here's number of bounces usually is an option, but secondary bounces. So like this emissive gives off a light, so it's going to affect the world around it. And here's like how this light hits here, and bounces here, and bounces here. So that's just it just tells the scene how to interact with the lights that are in it. So you can have some fun with that. It's generally pretty cool. You can start to get something a bit more true to life, really easily with just a couple rendering tweaks. Reflections. So it reflects itself. You start to see. If you look at things like metal that are very reflective, you'll see the environment within itself. So, yeah. And then you can see the effect that those edge normals had. So like you have something that rolls off nicely as if it's normal mapped, even though it's not. Whereas this is the original hard edges, so that doesn't look very realistic at all. Well, just things to think about. So when you're doing environments, definitely add your edge chippers, edge bevels. Any questions? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, this is all recorded, so you'll have this to reference. But yeah. Cool. Thanks, guys.